Hey everybody, join me as I take a deep dive into another Stephen King classic. In this segment I call SK Reviews. Warning, there will be spoilers ahead. So right out of the gate, when I think about famous trilogies like the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the Star Wars trilogy, book two suffers from middle book syndrome in that it has no clear beginning and no clear end. It's basically the Empire Strikes Back of The Stand. In multiple interviews over the years, Stephen King has talked about the process of writing The Stand. He said it took 2 years and it never seemed to end. And he described it as his own personal Vietnam. It was like hell to keep plowing through it, but he never wanted to stop. He always wanted to keep going. In a way, that's a perfect analogy. It's a perfect summary of my experience, my feelings reading the novel. I was always driven to keep going, and it's great and it's fantastic and it's huge and it's all of that. But there were times, especially in book two, when I felt like, oh my God, where is this book going and is it ever going to end? The issue with book two is that it seems to kind of lose its way. So book one has a clear purpose. It's the apocalypse portion of the book as society crumbles and melts away, and it's fascinating and it's harrowing and all of that. And then book three is where like the rubber meets the road and Stephen King like gets about the business of actually finishing this mammoth novel. Book two is just the part kind of where people are left following their dreams and their premonitions and kind of drifting and coalescing into larger groups and, you know, doing such fascinating things as trying to get the lights back on or establish rules of order for committee meetings in local governments. All of that is like real barn burner, fascinating, exciting stuff, let me tell you. So there's two things happening in book two. There's a large portion of book two, the majority of book two focuses on the good guys in Boulder, Colorado, where Stephen King was living, as they try to reestablish society. All of that good guy stuff that's not necessarily very sexy or very exciting. And the other part of book two takes place in Las Vegas, which is where Randall Flagg has coalesced the bad guys, or, you know, the dark as opposed to the light in Boulder. The only problem, the nearly fatal flaw of book two is that while it spends the majority of its time focusing on Boulder, the stuff that's happening in Vegas is a whole hell of a lot more interesting. Stephen King can write an amazing villain. He's done it over and over and over, and Randall Flagg is arguably one of his best. Stephen King has also talked over the years about the process of writing The Stand and suffering from serious writer's block and lots of crises of faith along the way. He had too many characters, too much going on, not enough ideas of what to do with the characters. And eventually he conceived the idea of like thinning the herd and kind of goosing all the characters to kind of get going, and then he was able to carry the book across the finish line. But when he's talking about the writer's block period, the too many characters, not knowing what to do with them, he's specifically referencing what we read in book two. And some of it, I'm sure, has been edited away or changed or modified before publication, but I feel like a lot of that is still there. You can see the mechanics of what he was talking about kind of come to play. There's subplots like Harold's journal, for instance, which the Free Zone Committee actually does come into possession to through some kind of dodgy maneuvers on the parts of some of the characters. But that's a whole subplot, and you can kind of see like Stephen King was typing and he was working through this and he thought, okay, the committee is going to get Harold's journal and that's going to lead to some kind of huge confrontation. But that whole subplot just kind of peters out. Nothing really happens with that. And to me, that's kind of reflective of Stephen King pushing ahead, not really knowing where he was going, laying the groundwork for some things, and then, kind of new ideas would come and he would kind of shift focus, but those original kind of dead end ideas are still there. The strength of book two, ultimately, like the rest of the novel, is in the characterizations. The book is just so long that the characters are given all this time to grow and evolve, much more so than in many novels, until the characters that you start off early on thinking are the heroes kind of demonstrate that they have lots of not great qualities about them. Nick Andros comes to mind, and Harold in particular becomes like this nuanced, multifaceted character, until at the end, like later on, these characters linger in the mind as if they were real people that you really knew, and that you honestly wish you could go and spend more time with, which is why so many people make rereading The Stand periodically or even annually part of their regular routine. These characters are so well fleshed out, they are so compelling, that they really do linger in the mind as if they were real people that you really knew in real life. So in a nutshell, the plot of book two, so kind of guided by pervasive supernatural dreams, the survivors of the plague of Captain Trips drift and kind of coalesce into two main groups that I mentioned before: the good guys in Boulder, Colorado, and the bad guys in Las Vegas. Boulder has a much more like kumbaya, let's reestablish America, let's get the lights on, let's talk about law and order, but also like human dignity, and give everyone a voice and a chance to be heard. And in Las Vegas, Randall Flagg is like ruling with an iron fist, and things are happening fast in Las Vegas. Eventually, Mother Abigail, everything in Boulder has kind of fallen into a really predictable routine, and Mother Abigail starts to feel like things are not going the way that the Lord would have them go. So she takes it upon herself to vanish, to leave Boulder, which actually kind of shakes a lot of the people out of their complacency and forces them to kind of think for themselves, which ultimately is better overall for the entire Boulder free zone. Except that there's a couple of snakes in the grass. Harold and Nadine hatch a plot, multiple plots, seemingly, but ultimately they create this hugely disruptive event. And then, as they are going through with that, they are fleeing Boulder as they realize that their time there is up, and that their true destiny awaits them in Las Vegas. Then, as they're reeling from the devastation, Mother Abigail returns, and she kind of chastises the main characters for drifting away from the purpose and the intention, which is this final confrontation, and she kind of sets the final book in motion. So that's it. Over 525 pages. Stephen King, like basically these groups, they get together, and Stephen King outlines, particularly in Boulder, with sometimes exhaustive and exhausting detail, how they go about basically getting the lights back on, amongst other things. But that's a great symbolic representation of what they're trying to do: get the lights back on.
And now a word about our sponsor.
For over 20 years, StephenKingCollector.com has been the internet's go-to source for all things Stephen King. From breaking news and real-time sales updates from around the internet, to forums where you can connect with like-minded collectors, to information about first editions as well as highly sought-after and rare limited editions, StephenKingCollector.com has it all. Additionally, the collector sells custom slipcases to protect your most valuable and cherished treasures. The collector now offers book sales directly through the website, and an all-around upgraded and improved payment system. With improvements and updates happening on a regular basis, there's always something new to see and experience at StephenKingCollector.com. The link to the site is in the description for this video. You should go check it out. You'll be glad you did. So I know this review so far has been much more critical about book 2 than I was about book 1, but there are a lot of really, really excellent features of book 2. There's a lot of things that work really well. So I wanted to talk about those now. So first off, Tom Cullen. Tom Cullen as a character is fascinating to me. He's very endearing. And despite the fact that he has this like really interesting, kind of maybe cutesy, some might say annoying vocabulary. He says things like laws, yes, or MOON, that spells submarine sandwich. MOON, that spells Tom Cullen. I found Tom to be very endearing. And while he spends most of book 2 out of the spotlight, the initial rapport that Nick and Tom have is very special and very touching. And then as Tom comes more back into focus, back into the spotlight in book 2, you realize that he literally, still waters run deep, and there are literally additional layers to this guy which make him even more interesting in the long run. He shows these flashes of hidden intelligence, and there's literally more to Tom than meets the eye. There's things hidden under the surface, and that makes him really compelling. The kid. So in the complete and uncut edition of the book, there is the kid, this wild, like fever dream supporting secondary character that, you know, it makes perfect sense. Like if Stephen King had to cut a third of the novel for the initial 1978 release, the kid was a clear and easy place to make some cuts, to make some edits. That whole section is gone from the 1978 version, and it's back in the complete and uncut. And I think that it's fascinating. I love the kid as a character. I think the kid perfectly encapsulates just the madness of what's going on in the world. He's vital. He's dangerous, he's perverse, and he's just fantastic. As I said, Stephen King can write a hell of a villain, and the kid is a great one. And I mean, just when like everything is broken down, people are staggering along, Trashcan Man is just like basically a walking husk who somehow manages to keep living, then from the distance, you hear like the screaming sound of a hot rod engine. And somehow, while all the highways seem to be blocked and congested with abandoned cars, here comes the kid in his old school, like Deus coupe hot rod. And it's surreal and it's bizarre and it's fantastic. And even though it's a digression from the main plot, I really liked the kid, and definitely a standout in book 2. So Stephen King experiments with some split timelines a bit in book 2, which does kind of help break things up and provide some interesting kind of back and forth. So in Fran's writing a journal, which she may come to regret, but she's writing a journal, and so there's these smaller sections in book 2 where Fran's journal kind of foreshadows, or like she's writing it about something that has already happened. And then we go back and see the thing that she's writing about as it happens. And also with the kid and Trashcan Man, there's like what's happening now, but also lots of reoccurring flashbacks that kind of fill in the details. And rather than just take like a purely linear approach through this 500 plus page section of the novel, it really does break things up and mix things up in a really nice way to kind of have this like split, jump forward, pull back timeline to mix things up a little bit. And like I said earlier, the book is just so long that there's so much room for the characters to continue to grow and evolve. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating in book 2 is that Stephen King paints Trashcan Man as, if not a good guy, I wouldn't say that he's a good guy, but he's definitely sympathetic. And one of the things that occurred to me is that he's like the bizarro dark version of Tom Cullen. You know, the Trashcan Man is essentially an innocent. And over the course of book 2, we learn a lot more about his just really abominable unimaginable childhood and the traumas that he suffered and the things that led him to become who he is. So he is ultimately, in my mind, an innocent, as is Tom Cullen. And I wasn't, he's gross and he's weird and, you know, all of the things. And he's got some really, really, really bad habits. He's definitely not a good guy, but he was surprisingly well drawn and ended up being quite sympathetic. Highlights of book two: anything that happens in Vegas, basically. As I mentioned before, most of book two focuses on Boulder, but the action is in Vegas. The scenes in book two that are set in Vegas are legit, scary, disturbing, upsetting. They get under your skin. They linger in the memory. From the perpetual, like, looming shadow of Flag, like, he's supernatural. He goes where he pleases, when he pleases. So at any moment, he could just show up. And that's really compellingly rendered in the Vegas scenes, as well as, of course, the crucifixion scene that is just devastating and really hammers home, like, a lot of people are drawn to go to Vegas, and most of the people that are drawn to go there are probably not great people. You know, they have skeletons in their closets, but they're looking for a group, a path forward, some kind of future, some kind of hope. And then in book two, Stephen King pretty swiftly lays waste to the idea that anything good or anything praiseworthy is happening in Vegas, and the crucifixion scene really hammers that home in a big way. So what doesn't work about book two? Book two also has kind of an over-reliance on dreams and other vague ideas. This kind of seems like a fallback, almost like a cop-out. Stephen King doesn't know why the characters would do what he needs them to do. So they have dreams. They have dreams, premonitions, visions that sort of compel them and fill them with a sense of, like, I need to go here, I need to do this. The remaining characters, like, truly feel like pieces on a chessboard, which is fine. I mean, the idea of, like, an unfathomably huge battle between good and evil, and then the human characters just kind of being pawns, it's okay. I mean, Stephen King did that also in Insomnia, and I really enjoyed that. But you spend so much of the novel of The Stand, like, getting to know these characters and rooting for them, that the idea that ultimately they don't really have agency of their own. They are just kind of to be pushed and moved into position for certain things outside of their control to happen. I think kind of undermines the characters as characters. There were a few out of character Deus ex machina type of scenes in book two that struck bum notes with me. Probably the worst offender here is the scene where Leo, who has just recently started talking again, and granted, he's a little kid, he's gone through something hugely traumatic, and he was mute or speaking in, like, grunts and hoots. He has started talking again, but in book two, he kind of goes into, like, this pseudo trance where he reveals all of this hidden information to Larry about Harold and Nadine. So Tom Cullen also goes into a trance. He's hypnotized in book two. And, well, like I said, there's hidden reserves to Tom where he, like, they tap into some deeper part of his mind, and suddenly he's speaking much more clearly, much more coherently, but he's a grown man, whereas Leo is just a little kid. And the vocabulary he uses, the context, the descriptions of what he's saying seem very, very much out of character for anything we've come to learn about him up to this point. Could potentially say that Leo has the shine, like Danny Torrance, which is perfectly okay. But in The Shine, with The Shine, in The Shining, Danny knew things, but he still came across like Danny, the little kid, sharing these things through the experiences, the lens, the vocabulary that Danny, the little kid, had. So the scene with Leo just comes across as overly convenient for moving the plot forward. So when Nadine and Harold get together and have their, like, horny interlude, Lots of things happen. I actually I liked that. It was a diversion for sure. But Harold has been writing his journal, his damning, hugely incriminating journal, and he had hidden it under a loose hearthstone in the living room of his house. And then when he realizes that Fran or somebody has potentially uncovered it, he moves it. He moves it and he hides it. But he lets Nadine read it, and inexplicably Nadine puts it back in the living room where Franny would know to look for it and where she ultimately finds it. That could have been Nadine trying to sabotage Harold, which we learn more about later in the novel. She could have been compelled to do that to sabotage Harold, but it's just another example of, like, I think Stephen King seemed to have been really moving toward the idea of some kind of super confrontation between the Free Zone Committee and Harold and potentially Nadine. And for that to happen, Nadine kind of just overly conveniently puts the journal back right where they know to look for it so they can find it. And ultimately, nothing comes of that subplot at all. But just the fact that she did that, I thought was strange and out of character. These kind of overly convenient hand of God moments, I think, are overall a mark against the novel, but particularly were prevalent and kind of problematic in book 2. So despite all my belly aching and all my negativity about book 2, it does have some truly exceptional standout scenes. So first off, early on in book 2, there's the scene where Nick and Tom take shelter in the cellar under a barn to escape a tornado. This is an early glimpse at Tom's, like, truly almost instinctual intelligence. Nick, obviously being deaf, couldn't hear the tornado, but even before they could see it, like, Tom had this sixth sense of what was coming and also what to do about it, and he saves their lives. It really hammers home and makes very vivid the danger that the characters are in this world. I mean, if they get hurt, there's literally nobody to help. The tornado could come and just wipe a line of devastation, make a path of destruction, and that's how it will be. You know, it could, if it blows down the barn, the wood of the barn will just be scattered and eventually rot back into the earth. Nobody's going to come to repair or replace the barn. And if the characters get hurt, nobody's going to come to try to save them. There's so much walking and drifting and traveling based on this vague idea that there's an old woman in Nebraska, Mother Abigail, who's good and who everyone needs to get to and they need to see. And the scene where Nick and the group finally make it to Mother Abigail's house is so satisfying. It's touching, it's warm, it's endearing, it's all of the things, because the journey has taken so long and they've come so far that to finally get there is really well done. This is preceded by the scene where Mother Abigail walks to a neighbor's farm to kill some chickens because she knows, just as they know to come to her, she also knows that they are coming to her and that she's going to have company and she needs to prepare a meal to feed her guests. So she walks miles to the neighbor's farm. She's so wiped out when she gets there because she is 108 that she sleeps. She kills chickens. She slaughters them. She gets them ready and she puts them in a sack, and she's walking back miles. And there's a confrontation with a bunch of weasels, like dozens and dozens of weasels, which is really, really scary. But at that point in the novel, it's never really an issue that you think like, oh my gosh, is Mother Abigail gonna die? Is Mother Abigail gonna get killed by the weasels? Because you look and you're like, I've got 600 pages left in this novel. There's no way Abigail is dying here by the weasels. But the scene is very exciting, it's very tense, and it's very satisfying the way she's able to resolve that situation. So there's a lot of apocalypse, there's a lot of walking and traveling and drifting, and it takes over pretty much half the novel before there's a serious confrontation scene, but it does happen. So while the core group, the good guys, are traveling, they come to a roadblock, which is basically an ambush of these really, really, really vile, degenerate male characters that have basically kidnapped and created a harem of female characters. And so there's finally this shootout, this violent confrontation. The good guys suffer some losses and suffer some damages, but ultimately they come out victorious, and they're able to add some additional people to their group. And even though it's more of a sequence or a segment, a portion than a single scene, like I said, the relationship of the kid and the trash can man, that whole section, everything with the kid, it's absolutely brilliant. It's so surreal. It perfectly captures the madness of everything that's happening in the world just in miniature. The crucifixion scene of Heck Drogan, as I mentioned earlier, absolutely harrowing, and truly lays out the stakes in a very, very palpable way of everything going on in Vegas. Harold and Nadine's affair, also more of a segment, a subplot than a single scene, but the scene where Harold and Nadine first get together, and Harold is just he's electric. He's bristling with erotic, just unbridled, horny electricity and energy. And it's so, I mean, it goes there, it pulls no punches, and it's so explicit, and it's so it just crackles with this horny teenage boy energy. And I thought Stephen King captured that point of view really, really well. And while the thing was a little bit obscene, quite explicit, and was almost oh my God, as I was listening to it, I can't look away because I'm hearing it, but oh my God, it was well done. And in a way, Harold is one of the most interesting characters in the entire novel because he's so conflicted. Even when he's angry, there's a voice inside him that's you have a purpose here. You have a good life and a good reason to be in this community. He's so back and forth, but he's not really likable. Even in his best moments, he's not really likable. And nobody ever gives him a break. He's not really likable, and nobody ever really seems to like him. So for Harold to finally get his moment in the sun with this just horny palooza with Nadine, I was hey, all right, something finally went Harold's way. Although ultimately it proves not to be the case. But for that one day in that first scene, hooray for Harold, he finally got laid. The scene where Nadine stumbles into a drive-in movie theater and she hears Flag's voice coming from every speaker, all the poles with the speakers, the old school drive-in style. She hears Flag's voice coming from all the speakers. That was really cool and very, very cinematic. And Stephen King, when the inspiration strikes him, can write one hell of a set piece. And the entire scene involving the bomb in Boulder, I thought was really, really well done. So premonitions start kind of crackling through the air. It's drawn out in a good way. The tension is built. It feels like it happens in slow motion. It's everything with Harold and Nadine waiting and watching in the woods, everything with the Free Zone Committee. Nick kind of starts to have these creepy crawly kind of spidey sense premonitions. That whole sequence was done really, really well. So I did notice a few Easter eggs in book 2. Mother Abigail refers to Fran's baby as the chap, which is of course what Susanna and Mia refer to their unborn child as in the Dark Tower series. Mother Abigail mentions The Shining. She says, "Everybody has a little bit of the gift of prophecy. My mother used to call it the shining Lamb of God, or sometimes just the shine." And then finally, Mother Abigail is referencing the far gone past, where she purchased a vacuum cleaner from a traveling salesman named Donald King. Well, Donald King was the actual name of Stephen King's actual father, who was actually employed as a traveling vacuum cleaner salesman. So even though Stephen King like had a lot of hard feelings about his dad abandoned the family. I thought that that was a nice gesture for him to give a shout out to his old man in The Stand in this way. So wrapping up on book 2, like I said before, it truly suffers from that classic middle story syndrome where it neither has a clear beginning nor a clear end. It is the longest section of the book, but it ends up somehow feeling longer than it actually is. If book 3 really does like snap everything back into focus, which is great, because by the end of book 2 I was feeling it. I was a little bit over The Stand, but it all wraps up in a very satisfying way. Stephen King does stick the landing, thank God. So there's a great list of standout scenes, character development, things in book 2. It is not without merit, but overall those pieces are not enough to truly carry the book, in my opinion. There's a drifting quality to much of book 2, like Stephen King didn't really know where he was going or where he wanted to go. And this is borne out in the things he himself has said in interviews over the years about the process of writing The Stand. So you have that context, and then you read The Stand, you're like, oh, yep, I can see that. There it is. It really stands out. So what comes next? Well, book 3, which is entitled The Stand, is the final book of the novel. And at this point, I have finished the novel. Book 3, like really, the rubber meets the road in book 3, and Stephen King just kind of barrels toward the conclusion, sticks the landing, and brings everything home in a very satisfying way. Thank goodness, because after book 2, The Stand really needed a solid landing, and I'm happy to report that it gets one. But that will be another video, as well as overall thoughts about The Stand. But for now, thanks to channel sponsor Thomas over at skcollector.com. Thanks to channel members Mark, Nick, Tom, and Steve. And thank you to you, the viewers and subscribers, for your comments, for your support of me and the channel. If you ever want to reach out and ask more in-depth questions, share pictures, whatever, you can always reach me at skfirsteditions@gmail.com. But for now, wherever you are in the world, I hope you take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you later. Bye.